Thank you very much for joining me today, Tara. When I was looking for guests, I came across your name from Satellite Foundation. I've had Rose on before, and it says, are you still a member of the board there?
Yeah, I'm a director on the board.
Yep.
I am on parental leave at the moment, so it's a leave of absence for a 12 to 18 month period. But yes, I am still on the board.
Yeah. And how'd you become involved in Satellite?
I became involved in Satellite from the beginning. There were some programs that used to run in Victoria for children and teenagers who had a parent with a mental illness, and the Victorian government at that time pulled the funding, and we were really keen to make sure those supports would continue. So Rose and a number of others who were involved in those programs came together in sort of a committee style to think about what could be done. So I was around in those early days as a young person contributing to some of those discussions. And then after I'd finished uni and had some professional experience under my belt, came back on as a director on the board.
Okay, so what brought you involved with Satellite in the first place?
Mum's got an illness called schizoaffective disorder. So it's a bit of a cocktail of a mental illness. It's like schizophrenia in many ways. She can experience psychosis and delusions, but it also has a fair whack of anxiety and depression thrown in with some bipolar type elements. So it can go from high to low as well. So I was involved in some support programs when I was a teenager because of Mum's illness, and that's sort of what led all the way through to Satellite.
So with those support programs, how did you come involved with those, or how did you become aware?
I was about 15 or 16, and I was finding things really tough with Mum and her health. And I had a school friend who was having counselling at our local council's youth services, and she'd mentioned my situation to her counsellor, and they said that there was a program ran through their council for kids in that situation. So it was a bit of a roundabout route. And, you know, it was a bit disappointing to realise later on down the track that I lived around the corner from some of the programs that were running for children my whole life, basically. But they're just, in the mental health system, of course, isn't always the connections that there should be to ensure that people land in the right supports. So, yeah, it was my mid-teens when I sort of first connected into any professional support surrounding Mum's health, and she'd been unwell since before I was born. So it was a bit of a long time coming, but it was excellent once I was there.
Yep. So with your mum, was it just you and your mum, or was it did you have other family members, or?
It was me, Mum and Dad. I'm an
Yep.
only child, and Mum and Dad are together. The challenge growing up was that Dad worked night shifts, and that's when Mum was most unwell. So he'd sort of have to go off to work about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it would be me and Mum at home alone together at night and in the evenings, and that's when she felt most unwell. Yeah.
Now, for the people who don't know, what sort of challenges did you then face growing up in this environment? So I can speak from my perspective, but I want to hear it from your perspective. So what's your perspective on the challenges that kids face in this environment?
It's multifaceted, right? So anyone who has a family member who's unwell feels a level of stress about that, right? So you worry about them, you care for them, you want them to be healthy. So there's what I would call the more typical level of stress about just having someone in the home who's unwell and needing medical support. With mental health, there can be additional challenges, of course, because Mum can't always think entirely clearly, can't wade through some of her thoughts about whether they're real or not. Often children end up becoming a counsellor, a mental health nurse, psychiatrist, all of the above. And that's what was going on in my situation. There's also difficulties sometimes with the finances or with, advocacy type services. So you end up speaking to health agencies or Centrelink, for example, on behalf of your parent. So from a very young age, I guess I felt as though I was a spokesperson for Mum. I could read her, I understood her, I knew what her triggers were, I knew what her difficulties were, and I, in some ways, took it upon myself to be her voice, and that's a big thing to carry as a child or as a young person, and also to feel as though I think it's pretty common for young people to feel as though that they sort of want to try and fix the situation or help mum or dad and make them feel better. And of course, looking back on that, you realise that that's not your role, and you can't necessarily fix or improve a situation where someone's mental health is so complex and so much medical support is needed. But yeah, at the time, it's really hard to see that, and you just want to make the person that you love feel better.
Now, in regards to this being explained to you, so as a young person, was this what were you ever sat down and sort of told, well, this is the condition, or did your mum ever tell you, or how was that sort of all explained to you? Did you have to work it out yourself?
Mum's pretty open about her illness. I can't remember the first sort of time she had any discussions with me. I suspect it wasn't a discussion with me per se, but that I would have been around when she was having chats with people about her health. So yeah, Mum's pretty open about saying, look, at that time her diagnosis was schizophrenia, so she would tell people I've got schizophrenia, and she'd have discussions about that quite openly. And also I was sort of taken along to all of her medical appointments. I remember sitting on the floor of the psychiatrist's office with toys. Mum was in and out of the old institutions, so even as a 3-year-old, sort of my earliest memories of visiting places like Larundel and Mont Park that she was in for months at a time. So it was always very clear to me that there was something going on with Mum's health. I can't really remember sort of when certain pieces fell into place, but it was always really clear to me that our situation was not quite the norm, and that the upheaval that was going on was different to the other kids. I was, I'd be randomly just pulled out of kinder for months at a time and then come back in, and I was aware that all the other kinder kids had been there and going there every day, but I was off elsewhere living with family members when Mum was particularly unwell. So yeah, I think it was always clear to me that there was something going on, and just gradually more pieces of the puzzle sort of fell together. Now,
did you visit your mum ever in the institutions, or was it something you were kept away from, or how did that?
Yeah, I did. I have some pretty early memories. I must have been 3 or 4. Actually, I have a clear memory of my 4th birthday. Mum was in one of those places, and I remember quite clearly seeing her on the hospital bed. She wasn't really talking or engaging at all, but she handed me a book, and it was Peter Rabbit. And my grandma, I think, had brought me along, and she'd handed the book to Mum for Mum to then pass to me to say, give this to her, it's her birthday present. And I sort of witnessed that exchange, and then had this unusual moment where Mum then just passed the book over to me. So yeah, quite clear memories from quite a young age of visiting those sorts of places.
Now, do you remember much? Was it a scary time for you, or was it something where you just wanted to see your mum and you sort of like, well, I don't care where she is, I'll go see her anyway? Or how was that environment for you? Because I remember from my perspective, it was very, I just wanted to see Mum. But when I think back to it now, it was very, very traumatic. So how was that from your perspective?
Yeah, look, the early memories of Mum being in those sorts of places aren't particularly pleasant. But I don't have a lot of those memories. Mum did have a more stable period during my primary school and early high school years. So she was still quite unwell, was still regularly under psychiatric care, needing medication and going through a whole lot of stuff, but she wasn't institutionalised. Part of that was, of course, because they'd closed the institutions down at that period in the early 90s. But also she was sort of coping in the community. So those memories in the institutions are somewhat limited, thankfully. I remember, though, it overall being quite a positive time, apart from Mum's illness. I lived with my grandparents and I had a very strong bond with my pop. So I actually have some really nice memories of spending time one-on-one with him down in his shed, going for walks with the dog, going to the park. So even though there was certainly upheaval and I was aware that things weren't quite normal, I was definitely supported by, particularly my pop. He was just a wonderful person. Yeah.
It's great to hear. Now, did it affect? How did it affect you? Did it affect you like your school, or was it something where it made you more focused, or did it want you to push you into a certain field, or how did that go?
Yeah, it's funny looking back on it, because of course it's something that kind of pervades your whole life, right? And it's very difficult to try and pull out what might have been the case if that hadn't have been your life story, because it's really something that feels all encompassing when your parents that unwell for so long. I definitely threw myself into the academic side of school, and that's something that I've seen quite a lot with young people in this situation. For a lot of people, it can be that education's kind of your legitimate excuse. Like, you don't feel as though you can just go out and have fun or should go out and do that or be a normal kid, but education felt like it was a legitimate place to be, and that it was okay to say to mum, I can't right now, mum, I'm doing my homework. So I definitely threw myself into that side of the schooling, and I think structure was really good for me given what was going on at home. So the structure of the school environment was really good, because things at home were not structured. Things at home were the opposite, and there was quite a lot of upheaval in the early days and stress about mum. Socially, though, I think that's where it impacted on me. I was often, I had trouble with relationships with my peers at school, and wasn't always the nicest kid, because I was often angry and stressed and anxious about what was going on at home. In terms of the second part of your question, like where did that lead me and how did that impact later on, it definitely impacted sort of my career choices and where I've landed professionally. And a lot of that's got to do with the supports from programs that were sort of the precursor to Satellite. And they sort of gave me the space to realise that I could talk about mum's mental illness, that I could speak about what it was like to have a parent with a mental illness in a range of settings, which sort of gave me confidence with public speaking, with advocacy. And so, practicing law was something that teachers encouraged me to do. I never thought I could do it, but they told me to put it down, and I got in. I think it's definitely shaped the sort of professional career that I've chosen.
That's great to hear. In regards to growing up, were you involved, like did the psychiatrist or the psychologist involve you in any discussions or in treatment or asked your thoughts with anything regarding your mum? Or
not when I was young. Probably since I've been like over 18, that's happened more, but not when I was a child, not when I was a teenager. And that was something that was really challenging because, as I said before, you're the person that sort of knows every nuance of this person. You can sense what's going on and where the train wreck's going, and you can see it at the slightest hint of a facial expression or a movement or the way that her voice is, expressing how stressed she is, whatever it is. They're the subtlest of things, and you want people to hear that, and you want the medical professionals to know that. So no, I was never asked or involved in when I was younger. I put myself in the position where I wanted people to hear me. I would be the one to call the CAT team, and I would be the one to occasionally pick up the phone to the psychiatrist and say, hey, this is what's going on. You need to be here. CAT, for those who don't know, is the crisis assessment team. And I had to make a number of those calls during my teenage years to them and to the ambulance. And so even though I wasn't involved in the discussions around her ongoing care, certainly when there were crisis situations, I was the one that spoke up for her.
That's really, really good to hear. And I'm sure people who had the similar situation probably completely relate to that. But in regards to your, let's say, your mentality, because it can go really one of two ways, I sort of think, right? You have this, you have your parent or your situation, right? You can either use it to be, let's say, perennial victim, where you're going to use it and I'm not going to do anything, go in this path, or you use it as your fuel to go, let's say, and do something really well. So in regards to, young people who might be in this situation now, what's your sort of advice to them in regards to how to treat this situation, or how to, let's say, leverage it into some motivation, or what can they really do? Because the reason why I do this whole thing is because I had no guidance. I had no one to sort of help me or even to look up to, right? So someone like yourself who's a successful lawyer, despite having this sort of this hardship in the background, right? He was able to do that. So what's your sort of advice to someone who might be
there's, I guess, a few things. The first, and I know it's really difficult to do, but the first thing I'd say is, as difficult as what you've been through, God, you've got some skills. Like, to be a child or adolescent, teenager who is kind of surviving that situation means that you know how to do stuff. And for people's situations vary, right? But it's really common for young people in that situation to be the accountant for the family, to be the shopper for the family, to be the person who carries the mental load about who needs to be where or what needs to be done. And all of that feels really heavy at the time, but it's something that as you go through life are necessary skills that everyone will end up having to build later on down the track, right? Like, resilience is something that everyone has to get through and everyone has to learn once they're booted out of home or once they leave the nest. You've just learnt them earlier, and at the time that feels really unfair, and you can get really angry, and it's really easy to get bogged down in that anger, I reckon, because it just feels wrong, right? You're not supposed to be parenting your parent, and so it's a really difficult situation to be in, but there are things that you're learning the whole way through which will actually be really valuable if you can put them to the right uses. The other thing I'd say is find supports. I know it's really easy not to trust the institutions. You've been given reason not to trust the medical profession, not to trust institutions, not to trust your schooling. If you've been burnt, if you feel your family's been burnt, that you've been done wrong by the medical profession, that you've been done wrong by psychologists, that your family member has, it's really easy to become detached and cynical and cut yourself off. But we're social people, right? We need support. We need community around us. We need to feel as though we've got people that have got our back. And that can be a really difficult thing to find when you're in a kind of crisis situation at home. But look around school. Look around. Probably won't be your parents' medical professionals. So like the psychiatrists, psychologists, etc., that are looking after someone with a mental illness, generally speaking, are still not great at thinking about the rest of the family. But Google it, look for supports, find anything to do with young carers, find organisations like Satellite, find a youth counsellor. I know you've got reason not to trust those sorts of professionals, but you can find good ones, and they're the ones that will help you through it.
A really, really great point there. But I want to touch on what you just said then about the point about the psychologists or the psychiatrists still aren't very good at treating the whole family, because the reason why I want to raise this, and I'm big on this, is that mental health awareness movement's fantastic now, right? So mental health, it's everywhere, but it seems to be limited just to depression and anxiety, and that's whereas people's awareness go. And obviously there's suicide, but that's depression and anxiety seems to be that, and that's it, right? Yeah. And there's nothing beyond that. So it's
easier conversations.
Easier conversations, right? So because, if you're someone who, let's say, might have depression or depressed period for a bit, you'll get all the support in the world, etc., blah, 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 blah. But if you're a young carer or a child or a teenager in a situation like you were, let's say even now, you're saying to me that they're still not even part of the conversation or going to be treated like it. It just blows my mind in regards to who actually needs the support. I'm not saying one's more deserving than the other. No. I guess I'm sort of am, but I'm just...
No, they both are, right? Yeah. They're both... The ideal situation is that mum gets enough help that I'm okay, right? So you do need the person with the mental illness to be getting top care, integrated care, specialties communicating to specialties and looking after the whole person. So the NDIS coming along has been an improvement for mum. And sad to say, but also moving into the private health system instead of the public health system has been an improvement to mum. you do need to look after the person with the mental illness as absolutely best you can, because that, of course, is going to have the flow-on effect. If mum's not in crisis, then I'm not going to be in crisis. All right. But then, of course, you can't always ensure that a person with a complex mental illness won't be in crisis. That is part and parcel of the disease. And as good as the treatments and supports could be, it's still a really aggressive, awful, consuming illness that no matter how much support someone gets, is probably going to be lifelong for someone like my mum. So then, of course, you also need the supports that are there for the family, particularly for the children and for people that person is supposed to be caring for. And in those periods of incapacity when they can't care for them, absolutely those kids and young people need dedicated supports. And the key, I think, is making sure that those who are treating the person with the mental illness are very aware of the specific supports for those young people or for those family members. I understand why they can't necessarily all be one and the same. Like the psychiatrist that was treating my mum when I was a kid playing with the toys on the floor probably specialises in mum's complex mental health, not in my childhood, early learning sort of range, right? Kids need information that is age appropriate, developmentally appropriate. So we need our own specific supports at those different stages. And the key is to make sure the systems kind of all work together so that no one's falling through the cracks.
Yeah, the thing I was talking to Maddie from Little Dreamers and Rose as well before about this is where it seems to me they were saying even like some of the, let's say, school teachers or psychologists or even psychiatrists don't know who to use or refer to, which for me it's just dumbfounding because you think, all right, go to a web page or go to a site, type this in and bang, there's all your numbers and there's all your referral there.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, because you're obviously involved in it, why doesn't that happen? It seems so logical that it should.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to teachers, man, they have a difficult job, right? Like we're in a world where we want them to do amazing things academically for our children, but we also want them to be their social and support network. And they're completely overworked and completely underpaid. And they're all doing, from what I've seen of them, the absolute best they can in a really difficult situation. So why aren't they going out and doing more? Well, probably they're at their limit and they would like to if they had the space to. I don't know, I tend to try and think the best of people, and I do think that's often the case for teachers. I do think they want the best for their students. So awareness raising is part of it, but it's making sure that it's awareness about really practical things as opposed to let's talk about mental health and why it's important. It needs to be, these are the organisations that work in our area and this is how I tap this child into this particular support. I think there is also a challenge around people feeling really scared about not doing it right. I'd been involved in educating primary school teachers about this sort of situation in one of my previous jobs. In my early 20s, I'd go to primary schools, I'd talk to the teachers about what my situation was like and what teachers could have done for me at that stage. So those sorts of programs were excellent, but they were pretty light on the ground. Like we didn't get around to every school, and we certainly didn't get around to every teacher. The resources needed for that sort of thing would be enormous. But it's making sure that as much as possible, as much as can be funded, as much as we can put those sorts of supports into schools, that people know what the pathway is. So from what I gather, the Victorian government's done something around getting mental health support workers in each primary school, I think they were saying on their ads recently. So, it's those people that need to know this is the particular people that we can refer kids to. And the other thing that was really important part of that discussion that we would have with primary school teachers is that don't be afraid to dip into those situations. I think people, when it comes to complex mental illness, are scared they're going to say or do the wrong thing. They're going to rock what is already a very rocky boat. So it's better not to do anything, right? I might upset things. I might do it wrong. I might say the wrong thing. I might send a child to the wrong service, whatever the case may be. So part of the exercise that we would go through with primary school teachers was saying, all right, how would you support a kid who has a new baby at home, who's just become an older sibling? How would you support a kid whose dad has been diagnosed with cancer? How would you support a kid in, X situation? And we wouldn't label them. And we would ask all their tips about how they would support these children. And then one of the groups would say, well, how would we support a child who has a parent with a complex mental illness? And then we'd look at the board at the end and we'd realise that all the things were the same, right? You don't need to be scared of mental illness or families where there's this really complex, heavy thing going on, because the way that primary schools can support kids in that situation is the same way they can support the kid who's suddenly got a new little family member at home. It's things like sometimes going a little bit easy if they seem really stressed in the classroom or are struggling to concentrate. It's checking in with them, not in a heavy way, but, making sure that you're giving them the support they need around their learning and turning up for school each day. It's all the things that primary school teachers already know how to do, how to support their young people, but it's just applying it in a different setting so that they're hopefully not so fearful of stepping in and being that support that teachers can be brilliant supports for young people in this situation.
That's some great points there. And I was going to say about, well, with movement now and the mental health movement, and you've touched on it a bit before about the awareness channel.
Yeah.
What do you think we need to go now beyond that? What do you think needs to happen beyond this? Everyone knows it's an issue.
Service delivery.
Okay, service delivery. Cool. Do you want to elaborate on service delivery from your perspective? Yeah.
Yeah. It's funding for frontline services, right? Because you could talk about it till the cows come home, but if you have to pick up the phone and call the crisis assessment team and be told that, like, literally these words were said to me when I was a teenager, unless your mum is about to hurt you or herself, we can't help you, right? So if our system is that stretched, then talking about it's useless. So you need primary healthcare to be funded so that our psych nurses aren't burning out, so that our psychiatrists can continue to have a heart and see humans, because they're so stretched that everyone's just having to move through perhaps too quickly. Our hospital system doesn't have enough beds, so people just have to be moved on, right? So you need to address that. And then you also need to address the intake, because you don't want people to get to crisis point. So you need different levels of service. And there is work going on in this area, right? So there are now centres being designed and set up where you can go and seek mental health support without sort of having to go through any of the other formal channels. We need more of that. We need places where people can literally turn up and go, I'm not well, or my mum's not well. We need help and support. And the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is stuff like NDIS. Wider use of that sort of service, I think, for people with a mental illness would be really good, because if you can pitch it right, then you absolutely can be really well supported as a family through that funding channel. Mum now has support workers that hang out with her during the day, take her to the shops, help her with cooking. She has funding for taxis so that she doesn't have to drive, because she finds that incredibly stressful and it's a real anxiety point for her. So it's about making sure that community services, intake type services, and then crisis services are all properly funded and accessible.
Well, how do we get that shifted towards that? Because I feel as though with all this funding announcements, you've got $1 billion here, you've got $2 billion here, and you've got all these commissions. Right? I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I see someone's a mental health commission here, and there's another commission here, there's a foundation here, and everyone's saying, I'm on this commission, I'm on this commission. And I see we're getting feedback, and then nothing gets really done. Because as you said, then service delivery is crucial. And the one that really hits home for me is where you said, because I had this happen to me all the time, Mum would get really unwell. We couldn't do anything about it. We didn't even have a CAT team. It was either call the cops or call the ambulance, right? And that was it. And we were told the same thing. Unless she gets really well or she makes herself voluntary, we comes in here, which you're just never going to do. We can't do anything, right? And that put me at a massive risk. And that puts a lot of young people at a huge risk because their parents are unwell. There could be risky behaviour like we're going to get in the car, we're going to drive to Adelaide, right? When they're high or whatever, having a manic episode, right? Yeah. Happened to me a bit. So I'm just trying to think, how do we hit this point home, or how do we start getting it? These people who are saying they're doing all these things, but then they're actually, as you know, from your perspective, not putting those system delivery things in place.
It's $1 million question, right?
Well, there's money thrown around everywhere. This is why I get frustrated. I see all these funding announcements and we're going to fund this and fund that. And we know where it needs to actually go, but it doesn't seem to be going to where it needs to.
Yeah. We need infrastructure. Like, you need the buildings, right? You need the staff. That's part of the problem. So that's, investing in paying these people well so that high school leavers go, that might be an interesting and supported career. Like, who wants to go into healthcare right now?
No.
Like, every nurse that you speak to is completely burnt out.
My girlfriend's a nurse.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And there's people leaving the professions in droves. It's just, if I had the answer, I'd put my hand up for being PM. I don't have the answer, other than saying that we need to address it from a whole bunch of angles. You need to focus on the people, which means you need to start appreciating the staff that are already in there and actually giving them appropriate conditions of work and pay. That means you need to draw more people then into the profession by doing that. And that starts with high school and uni and TAFE and ensuring all of those systems are feeding into healthcare. Then you actually need the buildings, right? Then you need to ensure that you've got systems that are kind of agile, that people can go, because mental illness is just completely changeable, right? Like, 1 minute someone's fine and the next they're crisis point. So you need a system where people don't have to kind of chop and change their services depending on where their health is at the time, that they have sort of continuity of care from the same people. So that needs a system that's really flexible, and that takes a lot of money and a lot of people. It's a really challenging situation, but it has to start, I think, with the people that are within the system, the staff, and go from there.
And what about the actual process for getting a person help? Because you have mentioned it before. But from your perspective, what do you think would be a better improvement to what there is now? Because you know how hard it was to get your mum help when they were sick. I know how hard it was, and you think it should be a logical thing.
Yeah.
They're almost better off to snap their femur in half or their leg in half, and they'll get help a lot better, and why they go. But from your perspective, what is an improvement on the solution that there is currently?
People with a mental illness who want this level of support should be able to have some form of social worker or psych nurse that works as like a ongoing assessment intake kind of person, I think, as in you need someone who the family knows, the family trusts, who knows the person who's unwell, who can go, right, we're currently at this level of anxiety, psychosis, whatever the case is. Make sure you're attending your psychologist. How can we make sure that you're getting to your psychiatrist appointments? Are you getting there? Are you taking your meds? Then they need to be available when crisis hits at 1 a.m. in the morning. So it probably would need to be a small team of people that work with each person. There's a similar concept in midwifery where it's like small little, like 3 midwives that work with the one woman, and they all know the case and they all work with her, which means that person always has a known person available. So it's kind of that situation, I think, that would be ideal, where the family and the person have this known, consistent contact who is in a position to access the right supports for that person at the right time.
And what have you noticed in your advocacy over your career in regards to telling, when you were sharing your story with primary school teachers and I'm sure other people over the time to get funding and things like that? What have you noticed? Have you noticed that people actually come up to you after and said, I had that situation? Or what have you noticed about it? Because the point, one thing I really want to start harping on is if people of prominence have this situation, they need to start telling people and getting involved. And the example I always use is Greg Hunt. So Greg Hunt obviously had a parent, and from my perspective, I found it very tough. If I sort of think, well, if I was in that position, I'd be doing things a little bit differently, but it's hard for me to judge. I don't know government bureaucracies and all that sort of stuff. But what did you find? What have you found during your advocacy with talking with corporates or with teachers and these sorts of things?
Mental illness is everywhere, absolutely everywhere, right? Doesn't matter what group you talk to, there'll be people that come to you afterwards and say, "That's my story. Totally get it. been there, done that. I know exactly what you're going through. I've spoken at government level. I've spoken at corporate level. It impacts everyone. It doesn't matter what your walk of life is, right? There's always plenty of people in the room who have experienced it really close to home. And then in some ways that baffles you, right? Because to your point, well, how have we not fixed this if this is something that is affecting all walks of life? And I guess part of that is that it's a complex health issue that affects all parts of a person's life. It can affect housing, it affects finances, it affects employment, it affects family relationships, it can affect drug or alcohol use. It's just so multifaceted. But yeah, certainly my experience has been that I've never walked into an environment where someone hasn't come up to me afterwards and shared their story.
And with your being a director of Satellite now, are you surprised? Were you there at the start, or how long have you been involved with Satellite?
I was there at the start as sort of a young person contributing in an informal way. So I didn't have any formal role with Satellite in the beginning, but I attended a number of sort of early meetings around, well, what can we do now that these support programs are no longer being funded? What could we create to fill that gap? So I was part of those discussions at the very beginning in an informal way. And then I've been a director on the board. My timeline's useless. I've got the worst memory for this sort of thing. Maybe 7 years, perhaps. So yeah, a while now. I think by the time I'd sort of gone through uni, finished law school, gotten my feet on the ground with my career, sort of came back on in a professional capacity in that sense.
And have you been, obviously Satellite's got some funding recently, which has been really, really good, and hopefully they can get more and build that. But are you very, how proud of you are of that? Because it's obviously Rose, there's not a lot of fanfare in doing what she's done, and to sort of finally sort of get some reward, let's say reward, or get the funding and the recognition after, let's say, a decade.
Yeah.
It must be quite rewarding.
It's awesome, really. I mean, it's that you often hear like musicians and stuff or actors, and then people call them, they're suddenly they've suddenly appeared out of nowhere and been this, overnight sensation. And in some ways it feels like Satellite's had its moment of being the overnight sensation because we were specifically named in the report coming out of the Royal Commission. We've had a significant amount of funding which has now gone into our programs that's validated the value of what we do to expand it further. But as all of those musos and actors say, there is never an overnight sensation. There has been an enormous amount of work that's gone into it. And just to have been, my role in it is tiny compared to what someone like Rose has been tirelessly doing for so much of her professional career. So being able to work near someone who has just given so much, and to have seen how that is now, I guess, coming to fruition in a really beautiful way, is something really lovely to be part of. Yeah.
Now, I think even though they got funding, which is great, and I'm very appreciative of it for them, I think there needs to be a lot more funding. So, what could a satellite do with with an increase in funding? Like, obviously, is it just a purely expanding their programs, or what are some things or initiatives that Satellite would want to do, but haven't probably been able to do just with maybe not enough funding?
I think a large part of what we've been aware of for some time is that schools are a really important jumping point from, I guess, life at home to professional support services that are needed. We unfortunately know that, the primary healthcare providers may not always be the primary source of referral to Satellite. Absolutely working on that side of things. Certainly social workers and other allied health professionals around families are very good at that. But schools are a place where, I think there's a real opportunity for people to access the support that they need. So that's something that Satellite's certainly keen on doing, and making sure that we can, have a really clear pathway from a school environment where a child might be identified as having a parent with a mental illness to the right level of support. And then it's program delivery. It's making sure that there is, we host a range of programs there. We try to sort of cater for every interest, right? There's like building professional skills, career type stuff. There's creative stuff. There's resilient stuff. There's a whole bunch of programs that we run. And so ensuring that they are being offered regularly enough that people who need them can access them, and are also being provided in areas where people can access them. It's all well and good to be based in Melbourne, right? But that's not just where mental illness lives. And I think we have been good whenever we've had funding at sort of pushing out to regional areas. But it's just never enough. I was going to say something else, and now I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. So yeah, I think it's about making sure that we can roll those programs out as much as people need them, and then also ensure that we have a greater awareness about what we do, so that people will quite easily be able to tap into it. I think the other thing that's really important, though, is making sure that we have also the funding to actually pay young people to build our services and to be involved in our services. I think some of the really important advocacy kind of jobs I've been involved in have been jobs. They've been paid, because we need to recognise that what young people are bringing to the table in these situations is absolutely invaluable. And it's, a level of knowledge that even someone with the professional certificates and degrees can learn a lot from, right? So I think it's really important as well to ensure that these sorts of, whether it's Satellite or any other service that works around mental health, can not just drain the resource of these young people or these family members or young carers, pay them, put them in professional positions, recognise that they come with a skill set that is worth a wage. And I think that's a really important thing to do. And I know Satellite's very good at that. I've been involved with SANE, they're very good at that. Because, you don't want people to burn out from advocacy. You don't want carers to be going out and spending their psychological energy when there's so little of it, when your cup is always so full. You don't want that to be just something that is costing them. I think it's something where you can build a professional career out of, not necessarily just talking, but actually recognising that there are skills there that people can then translate into direct service delivery, and have plenty of people with lived experience working within the system.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think also having that passion to do it as well. Obviously, they've lived it and they can feel as though I can make a change. And if I can get an accelerated pathway into, if they want to become a psychologist or a mental health nurse and obviously be paid well, you have that accelerated pathway with someone who's really passionate about that field. Yeah.
There's risks too, though. If you work with something that's too close to home, it can get really difficult. So we need to ensure that people have also been supported throughout that process, because talking about something that's quite difficult is something that can re-traumatise you. So there's got to be a lot of self-care skills that come along with building sort of a professional career around what you've lived at home, I think.
Sure. Yeah. No worries. So we've gone for a while, Tara, so thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy and you've got a young family, so I don't want to keep you for too much longer on a very cold Friday night. But if people can want to find out more about your story, is it your story online anywhere, or is it just via obviously they can read about you on Satellite on the website?
No, there's no particular place where it's all written down or anything like that. But I'm certainly around the traps at Satellite, and have been on SANE's speakers list for a while. But yeah, hopefully anything that people have heard has been helpful here tonight.
No worries. Thank you very much, Tara. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tara.